The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
You're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome. Oh, hot damn. This microphone is live. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am, of course, your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Wednesday, October 4th, 2017. Thanks so much for joining us at our early hour on Wednesday nights. We do Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Because after this, immediately after this, Noah Changa will be joining us, or will be doing her show on our channel. So definitely want you to stay tuned in immediately after this. And tonight she has Juma Baraka of the Green Party. He was the vice presidential candidate for the Green Party. So that's going to be an interesting, fabulous conversation that we want you to join in on starting at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So let's jump into the news, man. Today was a wild one, packed with, I guess, tentative excitement. When we heard about Rex Tillerson getting ready to come out with an impromptu press conference, I thought for sure that he was getting ready to resign. And here's why. He didn't, obviously, but here's my thinking process, or my thought process, and here's why I think it's important, or relevant, at least, if not important, is the fact that Rex Tillerson, albeit still not a friend of progressivism, he's the pretty stable hand, comparatively speaking, in the Trump administration. I think that's a fair statement. He is the steady hand, comparatively speaking, in the Trump administration. And so, seeing the level of insanity that is the Trump administration, we asked ourselves, how long would Rex Tillerson actually last in that environment? Particularly most recently, when Donald Trump undermined Tillerson with regard to North Korea on an issue that's of the utmost importance, right? North Korea, here we are trying to avoid a nuclear conflict, or just even a conventional warfare conflict with North Korea. Here we have Donald Trump chiming in via Twitter, undermining the Secretary of State directly. And then this morning, it came out from NBC News that Rex Tillerson allegedly called Donald Trump a moron, which, I mean, I think is a compliment when you consider all the other pejoratives he actually earns, right? Donald Trump is a lot worse than a moron. So if the worst thing that Rex Tillerson had to say about Donald Trump was that he was a moron, then I think that they could still work together. I'm just saying, that's just me. But it came out from NBC News this morning that he allegedly called Donald Trump a moron back in July, and he apparently was getting ready to resign in July. And Rex Tillerson jumped up and called a press conference. And, me and my one of my producers, Max, we had a bet going on. I owe him a drink. I owe the first round of drinks when I go back to Boston to visit or whatnot. And he bet pretty confidently, and he was right, that Rex Tillerson wasn't going anywhere. My thought was that he was going to leave, because how long, I mean, really, again, how long can a person that fancies themselves to be a serious individual actually deal with Donald Trump? Well, that's the A side of the question. The B side of the question is, somebody has to be an adult in this administration. Somebody. You can't completely. This is the problem of the presidency. We're seeing on full display the problem of the office of the presidency, of the president. It's the problem is such that no one can really hold him accountable unless he crosses a threshold that he's not authorized to cross, right? Let's give a worst case scenario. If the president of the United States chose to launch a nuclear attack, there's no one who can tell him no, except in the case of a two-person confirmation, right? Authorization. But there's really no mechanism to hold the president accountable, particularly when his party is in power. The only real mechanism is impeachment. And so I said that to say this: Donald Trump isn't going anywhere, most likely anytime soon. which means there's still a country that has to be managed. There's still diplomacy that has to be engaged in. And so the flip side of the conversation is that, Rex Tillerson, while he is not a friend of progressivism, he's certainly a stable hand in the administration that is Donald Trump. But at the same time, and because of that, rather, I would expect that he would leave, that he would not want to be around and associated with this type of madness. But then the counter argument to that is one that my producer Max made this morning, which is somebody's got to stay. Someone has to stay and be the adult in the room, which is exactly what Senator, I believe Bob Corker said. Yeah, Bob Corker of Tennessee. He said this in an interview post Tillerson. I started that too soon. Post Tillerson press conference. This is what Bob Corker had to say.
I don't talk about private conversations with anyone. Inappropriately, I don't anyway. I think Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, and Chief of Staff Kelly are those people that help separate our country from chaos. And
I'm sorry. I didn't expect him to be so candid, right? And honestly, there's something, you guys know I am a person for stability, right? That's my MO. My thing isn't necessarily peace, it's stability. And Donald Trump represents a unique threat to stability and subsequently peace, because he's an idiot. He's unhinged. Not an idiot so much as he is unhinged. And to hear Bob Corker, a Republican, come out and say that it's Tillerson and Mattis and Chief of Staff Kelly, those are the people who separate our country from chaos. That means that these guys, who again aren't friends of progressivism, but I'll take them, right? I will take having a steady hand around a madman. And I don't think that these guys are here necessarily. And I have to see more of Secretary Tillerson's foreign policy and his approach to diplomacy. But his approach to North Korea was to establish a back channel communique so that he can have a means of talking directly. The United States has, or at least had before Donald Trump got involved, the United States had a direct line to North Korea in a back channel to help stave off disaster. And so while they may not hit any check marks in terms of a progressive agenda, they are hitting high marks for me in terms of keeping us from completely collapsing underneath the pressure of Donald Trump's stupidity. But to hear Senator Bob Corker say that, it's kind of refreshing and funny at the same time, because it's true, and I would, on one hand, again, I lost the bet because on one hand, I'm thinking Rex Tillerson actually cares more about his own reputation and integrity and all of that than to stay with Donald Trump's administration. But if he leaves, who would we get to replace him? So those are the things that I think went into play this morning. And one of the funniest things was when he was asked about Donald Trump being a moron, or whether or not he called Donald Trump a moron, and he refused to answer the question. And I know this, it's kind of salacious. It's pretty much irrelevant to the bigger scheme of things, with one exception. Here's where it's relevant. It's relevant in that Donald Trump is likely to believe this anyway. And so while Rex Tillerson is prostrating himself and, recommitting his life to Donald Trump, so to speak, it's very possible that Donald Trump is seeing this and said, "Oh, you called me a moron, huh?" And then he's going to turn around and fire Rex Tillerson anyway. It's a possibility, but I'm that it's a terrifying notion, because then who is he going to put in there? We're save some miraculous impeachment of Donald Trump and Mike Pence and Paul Ryan, and then you get President Tillerson. Save that. I mean, we're pretty much screwed for the next 4 years. which is why we shouldn't put a lot of stock into trying to impeach Donald Trump. If it happens, it happens, right? But we should actually absolutely put our energy into movements, into putting political pressure on the system, not just on the president. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the protests that are going on over in St. Louis, because that's movement politics. That's action. That's people on the ground, people who are getting arrested, speaking, not just speaking out anymore, but carrying out citizen journalism. You know, those are the things that we can affect. Those are the things that we can affect over the next 4 years to not even really stave off some of the things that Donald Trump is doing and is going to do, because it's not really going to be able to directly stop that per se, right? We can have individual movements to address healthcare and everybody calling their senators and their Congress people to address the vote for issues like that. We can make moves like that, but you know, that's again one of the problems with the office of the presidency, because of the president, it has so much power. It has there's so much power invested in one individual, and that power is all but unaccountable when that power has its political party running Congress, the House and the Senate. I want you to weigh in on the discussion, 857-600-0518. So when Tillerson came out, again, he recommitted his life to Donald Trump, so to speak, and that was hilarious. But he began to speak about particularly about how he doesn't understand the Washington, D.C. And I'm like, that sounds good, Rex. You understand Washington, D.C. quite well. He understood it enough to come out, right? He understood it enough to come out there and know right away that this is how he has to. He understands it enough to realize that he's going to address one thing in the article and not address the other thing in the article, so that he's going to address whether or not he was talked about and talked to by Mike Pence, rather, to stay on. But he's not going to talk about calling President Trump a moron, because he actually did call President Trump a moron, and he doesn't want to be a liar, you know, come out and look like a liar to the people to whom he said these things, right? But he knows how to play the game. That's the long story short. He's up there acting all innocent, like, yeah, I don't understand. I'm sorry, I don't understand how, you know, Washington, D.C. works, but you know, where I'm from, you know, we don't deal in petty stuff. Well, you know, where you're from, you also tell the truth, apparently. You know, if you're where you're from is as cliche as your accent, then you know you know, to just own up to the things that you said. But he understands Washington, D.C. perfectly. I just thought that was hilarious for him to try to play innocent. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, Ben, this is Nick from Oregon.
Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Hey, it's going all right. Hey, so I was going to ask you kind of a question about aftermath of the discourse involving Las Vegas. Do you think you have time for that question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so essentially, I think you've probably seen, since you're dialed into Twitter a lot, is the conversation about gun control, obviously in the wake of this shooting, but in the wake of all these shootings, you know, the conversation of gun control comes up. And I think this iteration of the discourse in this round per se is really interesting, because I think a lot of people have actually deferred to gun control is actually just a net negative for marginalized communities, because of the fact that it just takes away from those first. And I thought that actually reminded me a lot of your position on, I think, Israel-Palestine, just kind of your international relations perspective of like being a realist. And I'm curious if you think that this kind of falls in that same dynamic. Obviously it's a little different, but in that same dynamic of the realistic scenario of this is that gun control, in whatever way we try and approach it, is just not going to be ultimately beneficial, or even really going to stop mass shootings or even just killings of marginalized people generally.
That's a tough question. Do I think
I'm always here for that,
or hang on, before I let you go, I need you to help me to make sure I heard you correctly. Are you saying what do I think about the perspective that gun control won't actually help change things, or what do I think about the fact that gun control is pretty much unrealistic to obtain?
To some extent, both of them. I mean, it seems like I don't personally accept that. I don't accept the idea that we can't do something about and I would say that it's appropriate, at least in this instance, to talk about the availability and the lethality of guns in these scenarios. But I can't buy the idea that doing nothing about it is the option. And then if that is the only option we have, that we only have to just sit here and wait as each tragedy comes around and just say, well, we just can't do anything about that because the dynamic is just so screwed up that, you know, we couldn't even approach it if we wanted to.
Okay. And then the B side of that question is, even if we did accomplish it, would it actually stop mass shootings? And is
there a policy way to approach it where it actually benefits people, especially marginalized communities?
That's okay. Let me see if I can answer that off air. Thanks for the call, man. So I don't, man, God, dog, you take me down a rabbit hole. That's a tough question, because there are a couple things at play in what you're asking. One, do I think gun control is possible in the United States? I honestly don't think it is until we weaken the NRA enough such that they become an afterthought and not the most powerful lobbying special interest group in the nation. Again, like we said, Monday night and Tuesday night, they have the ability to dictate the interpretation of an entire Constitution amendment. So until we weaken their grip and their stranglehold, I'm not sure that we can even get gun control. Doesn't mean we shouldn't fight for it. We should absolutely still fight for it. That's number one. Number two, to your second question, is whether or not I believe gun control can be implemented in a way that is beneficial to particularly marginalized groups. Underneath that question, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but underneath that question is the argument that marginalized groups should not be legislating away their ability to get access to weapons because they are marginalized groups. And then if we legislate away our ability to get weapons, then we, by definition, are limiting ourselves to nonviolent action. And in history, we've seen that there's very few occasions where nonviolent action alone accomplishes liberation. I don't know that I have a final answer on that for myself, believe it or not. Most things I've thought through enough to actually hold a position, a nuanced position that I can argue and debate. But I see merits in both sides. I see merits in the argument that, you know, marginalized groups should never legislate away their ability to get access to guns. I mean, it makes sense. But in the same time, I also believe that getting access to guns is not necessarily going to be our best way to get liberation, not in this season. And access to, you know what I think getting access to guns would do? Almost the old school Panther style. Sometimes when I see these police videos, I really do wish the damn Black Panther Party for self-defense was still there and marching and showing up on some of the scenes, right? A lot of times we see open carry protesters making a statement, but we need open carry protesters like the Black Panthers to be organized enough to actually be on the scene when police officers are beating the shit out of people. And they can't be a party for self-defense if they are just weaponless. I mean, what they're going to do is show up with their cameras, which is cool, but it usually does not stop that assault. And I know what I'm saying does kind of necessitate mass confrontations with armed people and police officers, but if they're in open carry states, what's the problem, right? And I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but that is the scenario that I see the need for marginalized people to have weapons, but that's not the usage that I hear being advocated for. A lot of times I hear people advocating for, don't let go of your weapons, don't sign on to gun control because you're not going to be able to fight the revolution without guns. And I'm like, the revolution is an abstract, I don't want to say far-fetched, but it's far removed from where we are. And so I don't know that I'm an advocate for not implementing gun control for the sake of some revolution that is far removed from us. I am an advocate now, as we talk about it, and you give me the opportunity to think it out through here on the air with you guys live, with you all live, rather. I am an advocate for something like the Black Panthers of old, Party for Self-Defense, people who showed up on the scene when police officers were assaulting, or at least had the reputation of doing that, or at least had the fear in the back of the minds of the institutions that people who are out here to defend citizens will show up with weapons and you don't know when. That is not far removed. In actuality, that's something that we need. I'm tired of seeing police videos where people are getting drugged and beat the shit out of, and all we have are cameras on the scene, you know, particularly in states where it's open carry. So it's a very complex question, because we can't engage in that type of protest activism and direct challenge of authority, direct challenging of white supremacy, if we don't have access to weapons. At the same time, damn, how many mass shootings do we have to encounter? So there has to be, and I think ultimately underlying the caller's question is how do we write policy such that it doesn't strip away our ability to have self-defense in the name of liberation and progress, and at the same time address the issues that allow people like Stephen Paddock to get access to all those weapons and wreak all that chaos and murder? Excellent question. I think I've broached the surface of it, and I will consider it more. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and/or question?
Hey, Bryce.
Hey, Bryce, how's it going? What's on your mind?
Doing good. So as far as, you know, the situation now with gun control is that people say that we have gun control, but it's like illegal guns that people get. But I think that's a BS argument, because we don't have, you know, real gun control, because if we did, people wouldn't be able to get these kind of weapons. Like,
yeah,
you know, we know about the NRA and you know, those effects, and it's like, dude, I'm not, how do I say this, I guess, in the hood, I don't want to be stereotypical, but in the hood, you can get an AK-47 or artillery rifle, you know, certain places you can get that, and it's not about race or whatever, in the sense of, you know, you can get this kind of weapons anywhere, regardless where you get it from, black market, overseas, government, or, you know, because we have a lot of people that's in the military. So, of course, they ain't going to have access to these kind of guns. And then if people that's not mentally there or crazy or evil, whatever, get it, then these things, you know, obviously tragically happen. And so it's a situation where that the regulation, I can say it right, regulation that we want, that us progressives, you know, have talked about, I think would help a lot. And I think we have to find a way to stop illegal guns too. We got to find a way to stop that spread of that too, because I think that would definitely help. And one last point, definitely agree with you about the Black Panther situation. I think we definitely, you know, I would love to have that. But the way we are as a people, you know, we are connected, but there's still some divisions. And then, of course, your whole Black nationalist talk that you gave is still, we got to get through some of those issues and some of the constraints of that in order to really get back to that movements we had back in the day. You know, we have good movements, but we need more, and we need to get back to certain things that will work and stop some of the nonsense and overreaching of things that's not going to work.
Thanks for the call. A couple things. I would say this a 2017 21st century iteration of the Black Panther Party for self-defense would actually almost need to be multicultural. And the reason I say that is because, I mean, motherfucking cops are just shooting niggas down, man. I'm sorry. I know that's kind of raw, but you know, we need some white faces out there, man, because the cops are less trigger happy when it comes to white faces. I'm just keeping it real. I'd be terrified. Like if I showed up somewhere with a big ass gun in an open carry state and I pop up on a scene where cops are busting heads of people, you know, there's a good chance I'm going to end up with a couple of holes in me. Right. But if Johnny shows up with the same thing, you know, it's a good chance he might get accosted. He might get some, you know, harassed, but he stands less of a chance of getting a couple bullet holes put in him just on GP. I mean, look at how quickly they killed Tamir Rice in an open carry state, John Crawford in an open carry state. So, you know, I know this is not what the caller was talking about, but he made me think about this. It would have to be a multicultural coalition and multi-gendered, like, you know, the whole spectrum of people out there with weapons representing the liberation. It would have to be, because otherwise, man, my black ass and your black ass would get a couple of souvenirs. and so but then to everything else that you were saying, actually, I think that probably kind of summarizes it up. 857-600-0518. That's really, like, I really have a passion to see people use weapons for actual liberation purposes. And when I say liberation, I'm not talking about the proletariat revolution. I'm talking about getting police officers to understand that we have rights, that we have the right to not be assaulted. See, what I'm getting ready to say what I've said, I'm getting ready to say sounds counterintuitive in that there is this idea that police officers are here to defend our rights. Right? I know that's not an idea you and I peddle in, but there is a pervasive idea that the police are actually here for us. And this is what's argued against us all the time. And when you see the police, how the hell do we even get here? But when you see the police, you see that they're not there to protect us, but they are here to absolutely have control. That's what they're here for. They're here for control and order based on whatever the prevailing system dictates as order. And there is a point in time where you have to let the system know that we are fully aware and cognizant of our position in society. And by that, I mean, at some point, we are going to have to hold the line, and it's crossing the tracks now, right? We see a lot of unfortunately, we're seeing white people, a lot of white young people getting killed, right? And now it's finally crossed tracks where we've been saying it for years, like this is happening all the time. And so now we're at the point where it has to be like a multicultural thing and I hate that terminology, but I don't really have another word right now on tip of my tongue, but it has to be a thing that has to be addressed from across the spectrum. It has to be, because the policing agencies are getting to a point, and probably have always been there, where they see themselves as them against the entire damn city. And y'all thought that it was just them against the black folks, but no, in actuality, it's them against the entire damn city. And this is what we're seeing in St. Louis, right? It's not only them against the city, it's them against, in St. Louis, it's the police officers against media. It's the police officers. I think Jordan Sheridan from the Young Turks was arrested along with 143 other people, many of whom were authorized observers, you know, people who were there to just observe, to record and document. And then, of course, you had journalists that were there, and you had activists that were there, and there was an entire dragnet. 143 people were arrested. That's because right now in the city of St. Louis, the police officers are carrying out the same mentality that I've been describing. It is them against the world. It's their city, right? 2 weeks ago, they were chanting, "Whose streets? Our streets." This is what the policing agencies were yelling in St. Louis. Whose streets? Our streets. They've lost their damn minds. No, officer, it is not your streets. These are not your streets. These are the streets of the people. Now, in your capacity as a citizen, yes, whose streets? Our streets. But in your capacity as a police officer, these are not your streets. You are a servant. Police officers are servants of the people. And we've allowed it, not we, white folks, yeah, have allowed it to go so far, right? To now, it's at a fever pitch where it's not just contained. I've been saying it for like years. I said it 2 years ago. if there is a police state, it started first in the black community, and we've been warning you all for a very long time that it's going to no longer just stay in the black community. It's going to go over to every community, right? So anyway, we'll talk more about St. Louis in a second. Let's take this caller. You're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hi, Ben. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you great, man. What's your name?
My name is Gabriel from Austin. Been watching the show for a while. You're doing a great job.
Thanks, man.
Related to what you're talking about, and everybody's been thinking about, what is the real deep root issue? Because you know what? One thing that conservative talking points are right on is changing some of these laws will help. It will help. But it actually doesn't, and I'm saying this as a liberal, it actually doesn't address the root cause. So you're thinking about our culture and the way it operates. It is a massively individualistic culture. You know, like pull yourself up, make something of yourself, make, you know, at 18 you're out. And then what happens is there's just no shared, responsibility for economic mobility and even war. Now, you know, people aren't getting drafted to go out. We don't have that shared responsibility of previous generations of all like being in and fighting something together that's meaningful. It's somebody else's kid, and it's obviously somebody else's kid if you're rich.
Yeah.
And so when everybody's just protecting their own, the idea of owning a gun and being so paranoid about, you know, protecting your individual assets and family, that pretty soon, just like you were just saying, people don't even realize that the police state is creeping, you know, and it's like, well, because it's not affecting my community, you know, I'm not worried about it. I've got my gun. It doesn't matter how many guns you have. If you have, you know, an assault vehicle coming over the horizon, you know, you're not going to do anything about that. And that by then it's way too late. So I think the lack of a shared, you know, inherent responsibility, or the idea, not that everybody's like this, of course, but that really, it plays into the gun culture and the fear, you know, that permeates our society. That's all I wanted to say.
Hey, man, thanks so much for that call. I think that's a great comment. And I think I heard you saying this, but you didn't really flesh this particular one out, but you started it. You started to say this individualistic society, we don't take any shared responsibility economically for each other, or any shared responsibility whatsoever for our community. And what that does, I'm not creating excuses for people, but when you don't have, I hate to use this, it takes a village, but it takes a community, right? It takes navigating through this capitalistic society requires help. And most people cannot accomplish it on their own. I don't care what anybody says. Everyone who talks about they got here on their own, that they made it there on their own. No, they all had help. And if you look at the profiles of a lot of people who fall through the cracks, are the people who commit these heinous crimes. They fall through the cracks of society. Some of them are just assholes. Some of them are just, however you want to describe it. But yeah, there is a profile where these people fell through the cracks in an individualistic society, and no one even bothered to notice. I'm not saying that we had the responsibility to fix them or to stop. Well, I'm not saying we had the responsibility to help fix them, but had we at least noticed, we could have almost prevented it and stopped it. Somebody in their community had to have noticed that these people were going off into this direction. Somebody in the dorm room had to notice that their friend was the person that their roommate, who's not their friend, they don't even really talk to them. They had to notice that this guy was going down this track. Somebody, I'm not saying that we as a society should coddle them, but we are so individualistic that we don't even notice a suicide, a person who's going to commit suicide living in our home. And when I say I mean someone who's going to do like a mass murder suicide. We don't even notice. the tendencies in our friends, and I can't even call them friends in this case because they're just passersby, even though you live in the same apartment with them sometimes. We're all just passerby. We're just roommates. We're passers-by, and we don't notice the change in the disposition of our neighbor. And this is not a fix for everything. No, it's not. But God, if it could prevent one, then it's something that we as a collective society should begin engaging in, actually paying attention to the people in our presence instead of this all day. You know, actually hearing the change in the tone of the conversation of your coworker. And I'll be honest with you, in some respects, this is about self-preservation too. You know, I'm pitching it originally as an idea of a greater society, of a greater community, right? Of an interconnectivity in which we can sense the grief and the pain of our neighbors. But even if you don't want that kumbaya shit, you got to preserve your life. You better be paying attention to your neighbor. You better be paying attention to your coworker. But we can't, because we have such an individualistic society that we are so consumed by what we want and what we want to achieve and what we're going to do today and what we're having for lunch that we barely recognize. We don't have the empathy to recognize what's going on with the person next to us who could potentially get access to a weapon and carry out the next mass shooting. So it doesn't matter which way. I really appreciate the caller for bringing that up, because it's a great point that I don't think I've ever talked about. I don't care how you want to sell it, but the reality of it is that we should take it upon ourselves to check on the people in our environment, in our sphere of influence, people that we can say hello to. I mean, it makes sense to me. I don't know. I mean, I've been wrong before. 857 600-0518. Good Lord. Good Lord. It's been a long day. I want to pause and thank all of our patrons. As always, you all are a huge support. Hang on, what's going on with this computer? I need you on so that I can give my patrons a round of applause. Thank you for all of your support. We have a couple of new patrons. I want to take a minute to thank Robert K. Robert, thanks so much for becoming a patron. We are making a move back in the right direction. Thanks to you, Robert. Jeff D, thanks so much for becoming a patron. Yep, there it is. Hang on, clap. There we go. And Jessica, thank you so much for becoming a patron. Thank you all. You get access to all the bonus content. There's a lot of bonus content. Most of the things that I talk about on the patron show, the patrons bonus content, is usually evergreen. And by that, I mean, it's something that you can click on and it's relevant no matter when. You could pull something from last year and chances are it's going to be relevant. So go over to patreon.com/the BPD show and become a patron and help us get to the next level. I want to hear from you all a little bit more. 857-600-0518. I had a couple of things. I do want to kind of talk about the Trump fraud issue with Ivanka and Don Jr., but not from the aspect that probably most people who consider themselves to be in the resistance are going to talk about. They're going to talk about in terms of this is more proof that we need to impeach Donald Trump. Yeah, well, I don't need more proof. Donald Trump needs to go. But when I talk about it, I want to talk about it in terms of how it is possible for rich people and the children of rich people to get away with anything. I mean, holy damn. Have you guys read the story from ProPublica? It's fascinating to me, particularly because of how easy it was for them to get out of criminal charges. But let's take this first caller or this next caller rather, and then we'll talk about it. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and/or question?
Hi, my name's Max. I'm from Boston. I have a topic question from earlier in the show.
Max, what's on your mind, man? From Boston. This is my producer, Max. What's up, man?
Yes, correct. Yeah, so I was watching Tillerson's speech this morning. I know you touched on it at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, go for it.
But I didn't really understand why he felt the need to address that story. It seems to me most of the time when these kind of rumors go around,
let it go.
They just kind of let them let them be.
Yeah.
At least maybe in a normal administration, somebody would do something like this, but in a Trump administration, it strikes me as a bit peculiar.
Yeah.
I'll take my answer off the air.
Okay. All right. I'm wondering if I want to keep you on for a second because, you know, one of the stories that that I picked up on from the podcast you put me on to Hardcore History was the issue of, was it Alexander Hamilton? Which one of the founding fathers did not address the controversy and got away? Well, so Thomas Jefferson was mired in a controversy, right? He ignored it and pretty much got away with it. Alexander Hamilton, on the other hand, and correct me if I have the wrong people, but he was the one who engaged in the controversy and it began to follow him the rest of his life. Do I have the right people?
Right. So Thomas Jefferson, the scandal that surrounded him for a lot of his political life was that he had children with his slaves, which I guess was a semi-scandalous affair. Turned out to be true. But yeah, Alexander Hamilton cheated on his wife. And then when he was accused of it, he wrote like a gigantic pamphlet defending himself in the court of public opinion.
And then it ended up backfiring.
Alexander Hamilton. Exactly. Yeah, you're totally right.
Yeah. So that when you mentioned this about Rex Tillerson, that's what I thought of. I'm like, you know, in most intelligent cases, you don't engage in the gossip. And that was my first instinct this morning. It was like, you know, I'm thinking he's going to resign because who comes out as a Secretary of State and actually addresses basically almost tabloid style gossip? So, all right, I'll address it. Thanks for the call, Max. And I owe you a beer because you're right. All right. Thanks. So that's a good question. Like, you know, in terms of just best practices for life, you know, it came from NBC News. I get it. But it was basically just salacious information that Rex Tillerson was responding to, you know, whether or not he liked the president, whether or not he thought the president was a moron, and whether or not he wanted to quit his job. I mean, on the scale of importance, boom, 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 that's at the bottom. So there's really no need for him to address these things, but he did. And I think, Max, you hit it on the head where you talked about in a normal administration, you would never address this. But we're talking about an administration that's far from normal. We're talking about an administration that the president of the United States treats it like a reality show. And people have to, he really sets up the beginning of all of his meetings so people can give him accolades and kiss his ass, you know? So when you're dealing with a petulant man-child, and I'm not just using those words to insult him, I mean, think of his behavior. He's very petulant. He's very reactive. He's very overly sensitive about things that a grown person, I was going to say grown man, but it's just a grown human being should not be concerned about whether or not somebody likes you, you know. But these are the things that he's obsessed with, right? He's obsessed with people being loyal to him. And so in that type of environment, I'm assuming that Rex Tillerson felt the pressure to go out there and say something and kiss Donald Trump's butt before he lost his job. And that's the very sad reality about it. That's the only way it makes sense. The other thing is, like, the only other way it would have made sense was for him to come out and just resign, right? And say, you know, whatever, or nothing. You know what? Actually, strike that. It wouldn't have made sense for him to come out and make a statement to resign and on video, a press conference. He just should have resigned. So in terms of, does it make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. But does anything about this Trump administration make sense? No, no, it doesn't. All right. So let's get back to the Trump kids. So ProPublica got a hold of a story that kind of blew me away. I think it was fascinating because it's almost, in any other administration, man, it would bring down the president. This one doesn't really have anything to do with Donald Trump directly so much as his children, but it would have been a scandal that would have followed any other president throughout their entire presidency. Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump got involved in a Trump Soho tower, and they were trying to get it off the ground. They were trying to sell units, and in their haste to make as many sales as possible, they overstated the success of the selling process. In other words, the speed with which you can sell these units really dictates the value of the units, right? Or at least it contributes to the value of the units. And so investors wanted to know, well, how is it going? How are they selling? What's going? And Ivanka and Don both made erroneous statements that are borderline, if not direct examples of criminal fraud. And as a result, they had to settle on a civil case, 90 cents on the dollar. So for every dollar they got from these investors, they had to return 90 cents. And then I believe it's the Bureau of in economic investigations. So there's a branch in Manhattan, I don't have it off the top of my head, that investigates economic crimes, and they opened up an investigation into Don Jr. and Ivanka Trump, right, for criminal fraud. They were doing a full-on investigation such that the Trump organization hired multiple top criminal attorneys from New York to help them in this situation. Those attorneys went to the DA's office and pled the case, saying that, yes, our clients overstated the sales. They overstated the information, but this does not necessarily constitute fraud. Okay, the attorneys made their case, but the DAs weren't having it. The prosecuting attorneys were not having it. They continued with the investigation, and it looked as though they were going to move to an indictment until Donald Trump called in the cavalry. Mark Kasowitz, his attorney, his longtime civil attorney who represented him in hundreds of cases. Mark Kasowitz, who's been with Donald Trump for at least a decade. He called him in. Mark Kasowitz, who does not have any experience, or at least is not known for his experience in criminal cases, yet Donald Trump brought him in anyway to represent his son and his daughter. And what does Kasowitz do? He goes straight to the DA himself. He goes to Vance Jr. What's his first name? His last name is Vance. So he goes straight to the DA himself, the Manhattan prosecuting attorney. And magically, all of the charges are the investigation, because they hadn't got to a point of actual charges. The investigation goes away. Well, we wonder how and why. In the report from ProPublica, they stated that Kasowitz did not have any new evidence. He did not make any new arguments. In fact, they specifically said that Kasowitz repeated the same exact arguments that the criminal attorneys had stated earlier. So he's coming back to the DA's office to try to get his clients off the hook, but he makes the same exact arguments as the criminal attorneys, and voila, the investigation disappears. Sealed. Done. Turns out that Kasowitz actually made a $25,000 donation to the campaign, the re-election campaign of this name is going to bother me till I get it. I mean, I got the whole goddamn story in my head, and I can't think of the prosecuting attorney's actual name. But so Kasowitz comes along, offers him $25,000. And here's the thing. It first immediately seems like a quid pro quo, right? But the prosecuting attorney is a little smarter than that. And I'm getting to the real thing that I want to talk about, but I have to give you the background. So Kasowitz made this Cyrus Vance Jr. I had a filibuster long enough to get me the guy's name. All right, so Cyrus Vance Jr. is the Manhattan district attorney, and he receives $25,000 from Kasowitz. Kasowitz and Vance are smart enough to know that this is going to look like quid pro quo. So what Vance does, the DA, he gives the money back and says, I can't accept this donation because you have a trial in front of me. 6 months later, all of the charges are gone, right? After the charges are gone, after the case is sealed, or all the materials are sealed, 6 months later, Kasowitz gives him more money than the original $25,000. He gives him more money than the original $25,000 and proceeds to help him raise a total of $50,000 for his re-election campaign. I mean, it kind of blows me away how cheap our politicians really are. I mean, God, I mean, $50,000, don't get me wrong, $50,000 right now would be a huge help to me, but $50,000 for the sake of my integrity and for the sake of something that could come out years later and implicate me in a cover up of fraud and obstruction of justice. So Vance Curry, whatever the hell his name, Cyrus Vance Jr. I don't know where the hell Curry came from. Cyrus Vance Jr. Is now, being viewed through the lens of the entire nation as someone who took money in exchange for making an investigation go away. Because Vance, he not only made the investigation go away, but he had to do so by overruling his own prosecutors. So it was not as though there was new evidence that this attorney Kasowitz presented. It was not as though it was new arguments. No. All it was he came in with the same exact arguments as the previous attorneys, but he came in with a $25,000 check. Oh, we don't want it to look like quid pro quo, so let me return that check and see me in 6 months. And then 6 months later, he ended up getting a total of $50,000. All on behalf of Donald Trump Sr. and Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump. Now, somebody should, hopefully this will lead to a real investigation and charges being, if they have the evidence and the paper trail, charges should be brought up against the whole lot of them. But the problem with quid pro quo is that it's almost impossible to prove unless someone is dumb enough to say, hey, give me this and I'll give you that. But, it seems to be enough evidence to show that Donald Trump was able to make the fraud case against his children disappear into thin air. Meanwhile, average Joe schmuck, poor people like you and me, man, we can't even get out of a damn traffic ticket. That's really what that's my takeaway from this story. I mean, I already knew the Trumps were corrupt, right? And I'm glad, hey, there's some evidence for it. Let the cookies crumble, let everything fall the way it's going to fall. But you know what this says to me? This says to me that if you have money and your money has given you power, you could get out of just about anything. And then years later, somebody will write a story about it, but then who's going to actually do something about it? Let's take this caller. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and/or question?
Hi, my name is Jim. About your previous story, I just want to say a lot of people have been joking around that we should run GoFundMe campaigns so that we could bribe our own politicians so that maybe they can help us.
And we have to do something. Hey, we're going to need a whole lot of people to pitch in. I mean, how many people would it take for us? Thanks for the call, man.
Hey, Bernie did it with $27 of donation. So
he did, but that's Bernie. That's Bernie. Like, how many of us would it take? How many people would I need to get $27,000, man? I mean, I'm gonna need 27,000 people. So thanks for the call. I mean, and that's the sad reality of it, man. That's where we are. Where can we buy our politicians? How cheap are they? It's so cheap on one hand, but it's unattainable on the other hand. Like, because it's not just raw money. Like I couldn't go out the street with the shoebox full of $100 bills and $20,000 and say, hey, can you make this case go away? I'm gonna go to jail for trying to bribe somebody, right? I could even do it the legit way. Like I can do it and make a contribution to their campaign, but it's really a combination of things. It's money, it's raw money, it's access to power, it's influence, and it's popularity. Because later on, Kasowitz was bragging on how he got them off, right? And this is how some of this began to unravel, was his big mouth. But it's a combination of things, and in one regard, it's such a small amount of money, but for you and me who ain't got no money, it's something that we can never really pull off, and we're stuck in the system with the public defender. Meanwhile, the president of the United States gets his two children out of trouble with a $25,000 check. And don't tell me Donald Trump didn't know about this. Donald Trump knew about this whole damn thing. That's why he called in Kasowitz in the first place. And, there's not going to be anything that's connected back to Trump. This is not going to be anything used to impeach him. But I would tell you this, if this had been a Democrat and the Republicans were in Congress, they would drag this out in every single painful detail. Every detail. And if it was not something that could get the president, they would gladly get the president's children. They would gladly. I mean, shit, you think the Republicans would not take down Chelsea Clinton? Hell, I'll take down Chelsea Clinton. Anyway. All right, folks, I'm going to end a little early tonight because I want to give you plenty of time to reset and refresh your page and get ready for Noah Chonga. She has an interview with Ajuma Baraka. He was a vice presidential candidate for the Green Party. She's interviewing him tonight on our channel, and I believe she's broadcasting on multiple channels. So you can go to her channel to get it, or you can refresh the page here. David, my producer, if you're here, I'm pretty sure you're here in the chat room. Correct me if I'm wrong. I want to make sure I give the right information, but I do believe she's going to be streaming on multiple channels, and if not, let's give the link. Let's make sure we give everyone the link to go and check that out and support her as she does this interview, which I think is going to be a great interview. I'll keep all of my personal feelings about Ajuma Baraka locked up. No, I think he's a cool guy. I like what he generally stands for. But you all know me. You know me long enough. You've seen me on Twitter. You know how I am. But that's besides the point. Go over there and check out the interview. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of fabulous and wonderful takeaways from this interview, because I know regardless, he has a lot of good stuff to say. So go and check it out. Also, we'll be back tomorrow night, 9 p.m. regular time broadcasting. And do me a favor, go over to patreon.com/the BPD show and become a patron. If you've been listening to us for a while and you like our show, go to become a patron. And I'm out. I will see you all next time. Where's that exit music? There it is.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Crazy mother.
If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.